Hello, everyone. We're happy to welcome you at our webinar on how to get your clinical trial approved in Eastern Europe. And today we would like to start with the biggest country in the region, Russia, which is also one of the most popular destinations for clinical studies among sponsors from all over the world. My name is Yanaeva, and I'm Head of Business Development at OCT Clinical. I have been with the company for 8 years, and I'm often the first contact for sponsors, consulting them on all aspects of study planning, including specifics of the region, timelines, and study costs. I'm glad to introduce you to my colleague, Natalya Eliseeva, who is a Senior Regulatory Manager at OCT Clinical. With over 10 years of experience in the regulatory sphere of clinical research, Natalya is ensuring smooth regulatory approval of clinical studies in Russia and Eastern Europe. Natalya's strong experience and expertise and her input in the regulatory risks mitigation in the process of clinical trial approval is hard to overestimate. Hi, Natalya. How are you today?
Hi, Anna. Pretty good, thank you. And thanks for your kind introduction.
Sure. So before we move forward, here is a brief agenda of today's talk. I will start with just a couple of words about OCT Clinical, about who we are and why we are the speakers at this webinar. OCT Clinical is a full-service CRO from St. Petersburg, Russia, and operational across Europe and CIS countries. Over 15 years of work has given us strong experience in the region, so I would like to share what we believe is most crucial to know when you are planning a study in Eastern Europe. From the regulatory perspective, all these countries that you can see on the slide have a very good environment for clinical research. Their local regulations are in line with the international legislations and are oriented on main regulatory authorities such as FDA and EMA. Countries that are not part of the European Union, such as Russia, Belarus, Georgia, currently have a trend for harmonization of regulations for clinical trials. However, every single non-European country has unique local features, such as specific processes of interaction between the applicant and the authorities, order of expertise, requirements for submission package, and others. Although these differences may sometimes seem challenging, as soon as you learn them, you realize that the clinical trial approval process in Russia and in the neighbor countries is actually very straightforward and transparent. And the fact that almost all studies submitted by OCT for approval have been approved by the local authorities only confirms that. So now I would like to pass the word to Natalya, who will elaborate on the clinical trial approval process in Russia, the second largest region in the world in terms of the number of clinical trial participants.
Thank you, Anna. And I would like to start with the main details of clinical trial approval in Russia. First of all, not every company can submit a clinical trial application package for approval in Russia. Only a sponsor that has a local representative office or a Russian CRO representing sponsors' interests can submit a clinical trial application. Another limitation is for phase 1 studies, which aim is to demonstrate safety of the investigational product. Such phase 1 studies of medications manufactured outside of Russia and which involve healthy volunteers are prohibited in Russia. Clinical trials are divided by application type in 3 groups: local trials, international multicenter trials, and post-marketing studies. However, all these studies have the same requirements for submission packages as well as for approval timelines, study conduct, and reporting during the study conduct. Also, there is no difference between clinical trial application processes for different study phases or types of medications, like original or generic medication, biological or chemical drug, international or local study, etc. It should be noted that non-interventional studies are regulated separately by IRBs. Biomedical cell products are regulated by separate laws since 2018, and medical devices are regulated by separate law and separate regulatory body, and these regulations have nothing in common with drug product regulation.
Thank you, Natalia. Now, the next slide describes the whole process any company must go through in order to get their study approved in Russia. The process can be broken down to three steps. First is approval by the main regulatory body, the Ministry of Health, which takes about 60 to 90 days. So these timelines vary. For example, if you make a submission in December, you should take into account almost 2 weeks of bank holidays in Russia from January 1st to 10th. And the same happens in May, with several days of bank holidays that will make the approval by the Ministry of Health longer. As soon as the Ministry of Health approval is obtained, it is obligatory to get approval from the local ethics committees, which takes about 2 weeks. In parallel with that, an import license for the study drug and the export license for biosamples, in case you are planning to have a central lab outside of Russia, must be obtained through a separate submission to the Ministry of Health. Natalya will describe each step in details.
That's right, Anna. As you said, to begin a clinical study in Russia, you have to obtain approval from the Russian Ministry of Health first. You can see the stages of this process with the timelines on the slide, but let's deal with the specifics. As you can see, the Ministry of Health involves its two expert institutions for the examination of submitted documents. The first one is the Council of Ethics, and the second is Scientific Center of Evaluation of Medicines. All of communication with them goes through the Ministry of Health only, and we can't apply directly to these experts, and they do not respond directly to us. This is so-called single window approach, and medical and ethical experts make decisions regarding clinical trial approval in parallel. According to the law, primary expertise of the submitted documents takes 5 business days and is conducted by the Ministry of Health. If there are no queries, the Ministry of Health sends the materials to expert institutions for further expertise. Both the expert institutions have 30 business days to examine the documents and pass their conclusions on the possibility to conduct the trial back to the Ministry of Health. After that, the Ministry of Health has 5 business days to make the decision on issuing clinical trial approval. Timelines are typically about 2 or 2.5 months from the submission date till the obtaining of clinical trial approval on hands. So now let's continue with the application package content. I want to focus your attention on one crucial point. All documents for the clinical trial application package must be translated into Russian. Moreover, some documents require notarization. Adaptation of the terminology of the translated documents is an important part of documents preparation for submission, and it could be really an issue without a local specialist or CRO partner. The brief content of document package for initial submission is presented on this slide. And as you can see, documents may be logically divided by 4 parts: administrative documents, main study documents, IMP-related documents, and side documents. The whole package must be printed on paper for submission to the Ministry of Health. Pages of documents should be binded, numbered, and affixed with the seal of the applicant. The submission package should be accompanied by the cover letter. Though the cover letter is not mandatory by law, it is still appreciated by the regulatory experts. The cover letter contains address to the Ministry of Health, to the relevant clinical trial department, etc. It also contains clinical trial summary in free form and a detailed list of attached documents. In addition to the hard copies, all documents and information about clinical trial must be submitted electronically on the Ministry of Health web portal. To be able to use this Ministry of Health web portal, the applicant must have a registered account there. After all documents are uploaded and information is entered, an application form can be generated for printing. The printed application is to be signed by the applicant and attached to the hard copy submission. If a sponsor uses a CRO, a power of attorney from sponsor to CRO is mandatory. It must identify the clinical trial by its protocol code, its title, and provide a detailed list of delegated activities. The power of attorney must be notarized, apostilled, or have consular legislation. Authorized translation into Russian is obligatory for submission to the Ministry of Health. Next are the documents confirming state fee payments. State fee is only paid once before the initial submission. The state fee for the expertise of local clinical trial is approximately $1,500. For international clinical trial is about $2,800, and for post-marketing study is about $800. The fee amount is the only thing that varies due to the clinical trial type, local, international, or post-marketing study. And the last in this section are the documents confirming the relationship between sponsor and the product license holder, if there are two different legal entities. This is specific to the Russian clinical trial application process. And let's continue with the main study documents part. Study protocol, investigator's brochure, informed consent form, and any subject materials like leaflets, diaries, or cards if applicable. There are no special requirements for these documents, but all of them are only accepted in full translation into Russian. All these documents are required for clinical trial approval and clinical trial conduct under Ministry of Health regulation, and no matter what the phase of the studies, IMP type, and others. Here I'd rather tell you about the insurance. The subject's insurance has to be obtained from a local insurance company or from the local representative of the insurer. There are typical rules for compulsory life and health insurance of patients involved in a clinical trial of a drug product in Russia. And these rules are a good regulatory tool that works well and is very easy to deal with. These rules are applicable for all insurance companies who provide insurance for clinical trial. They set unified terms of insurance agreements, tariffs, and payments in case of harm to a subject's health caused by any flaw of an investigational product or drawbacks of the study protocol. And now let's move to IMP-related part. The volume of the IMP-related documents and the information on the drug required for the clinical trial application in Russia is quite low. The only documents are requested for submission are the certificate of analysis for the tested drug and for placebo if applicable. As for comparator or concomitant drugs, if they are purchased locally, providing certificates for them is not obligatory for the initial array submission. And certificate of analysis has to be issued by the manufacturer. It must contain the expiration date and must be signed by a notarized person from the manufacturer. One more requested document is a GMP certificate from the manufacturer of the drug product. There is a requirement that this document should be issued by a notarized institution of the manufacturer's country. It means if an IMP is manufactured in China, only GMP certificate issued by a China authorized body is applicable for submission in Russia. For submission to the Ministry of Health, a GMP certificate must be provided with an authorized translation into Russian. Certificates of materials for drug substance, a brief manufacturing scheme, expanded data on stability of packaging, none of this is needed. Even labels are not obligatory for the initial submission. So the IMPD and the volume of IMP data and materials contained in IMPD are not needed for clinical trial approval of drug products in Russia. And additional document must be provided to Ministry of Health. In case the sponsor and manufacturer are two different companies, the document confirming their relationships in respect to study drug manufacturing, like work orders, contracts, are attached to submission package. And we come to the last part of submission package. One more advantage of clinical study approval in Russia is an extremely short list of documents collected from sites. Only CVs of principal investigators are collected. A copy is enough, and these CVs are provided using by MOH template. A key requirements for principal investigators are a minimum 3 years of experience in clinical trials, a valid certificate confirming doctor's specialty related to the indication of the clinical trial, and the PI's employment at the relevant study site. Regarding information about sites, it is necessary to provide the full name of the medical institution, its legal address and current address, and contact details. For clinical trial conduct, other documents from the study team and sites will be required for the study files like CVs, certificates, licenses, and others. So these documents are collected later as well, but for initial submission to the Ministry of Health, only CVs from principal investigators and some very general information on the study site is sufficient. So as you can see, the list of required documents for clinical trial approval is pretty easy to collect. You just have to remember some specific requirements for documents, and the preparation of quality translation into Russian can be time consuming. And as Anna already said, the next step before study initiation at sites is obtainment written approvals by the site's local ethics committees. There are no limitations as to when the clinical trial application package should be submitted to the local ethics committee. The package can be reviewed in parallel with the array expertise, but in practice, most of local ethics committees accept clinical trial application only with the attached Ministry of Health approval. And this procedure is regulated by the ethics SOPs. Timelines of expertise can vary, and on average it takes 2 weeks. Approximately 70% of local ethics committees are free of charge, and the other 30% require fee payments. Normally paid local ethics committees are the ones belonging to private clinics. And clinical trial application package submitted to local ethics committees similar to what the Ministry of Health require. After approvals for clinical trial conduct from the Ministry of Health and local ethics committees are obtained, and last step is the obtainment of import and export licenses. For the import of investigational drugs from the outside of Russia, an import license needs to be obtained. An import license is issued by the Ministry of Health and usually takes about 2 weeks. Together with the application for the import license, the following documents must be provided to the Ministry of Health: a certificate of analysis for the imported batch, labels in Russian, a rationale for import, and a detailed calculation of imported quantity. The Ministry of Health does not approve the import of any extra quantity of investigational drug without sufficient rationale. If a central lab is intended to be involved in the study and will be located outside of Russia, an expert license is obligatory for the shipment of biosamples to the foreign central lab. An expert license is issued by the Ministry of Health too, and in practice, 3 weeks are needed to get a hard copy expert license on hand. An expert license application package contains a detailed calculation of exported quantity and types of biosamples, information about the purpose and destination, and documents confirming it all, extras from the protocol and laboratory manuals. As soon as the Ministry of Health and local ethics committees' clinical trial approval is obtained, along with all necessary import and export licenses, you are good to go with IMP logistics, site initiation visits, and patients enrollment. And during the study, some information must be reported to the Ministry of Health. The first is information regarding the start of the study. This type of notification is requested from every study site by the law. Within 3 business days of the start of the study, every medical institution has to notify the Ministry of Health about the start of a certain clinical study at their facilities. The specific point is that there is no clear definition in Russia of what event is considered to be the start of the study. So it could be the date of a site initiation visit, or the date when the contract for clinical trial came into force, or the first visit of the first patient is the most common milestone. Good practice is that sponsor or CRO sends a similar notification as well, though it is not obligatory. Notification about the end of the study is also required from a sponsor or CRO. This notification must be submitted to the Ministry of Health in 5 business days after completion or early termination of the study. Same as for the study start, there is no clear statement in Russian legislation as to what event is considered to be the end of the study. It could be last visit of the last patient, the database log, or the closeout visit of the last site. It is up to the sponsor or CRO, but when choosing the date of the end of study notification, we should consider that 3 months after that, the final clinical study report must be submitted to the Ministry of Health. And lastly, some words about safety reporting during the study. The responsible body for pharmacovigilance in Russia is the Federal Service in the sphere of healthcare of Russia. By the way, this body is also responsible for the regulatory inspections of clinical trials. So this is not the Ministry of Health, this is a separate federal body. Safety information for reporting to the Pharmacovigilance Service is quite similar to all other countries. So SARS require express reporting 7 days for death cases and life-threatening events and 15 days for other serious unexpected reactions. Development safety update reports should be submitted to Pharmacovigilance Service no later than 60 days after the TSUR data log point, together with the current version of the investigation brochure. All of these safety reports can be submitted electronically via the service's automated information system.
Thank you very much, Natalya, for such a detailed description of the whole process. To sum up all said above, here are the key things worth remembering when preparing for your study approval in Russia. As Natalya explained, first of all, there is a unified clinical trial approval process for all studies types, phases, and types of drugs, except for non-interventional studies, cell therapy, and medical devices. However, please remember that phase 1 studies of safety in Russian healthy volunteers are prohibited if the drug is manufactured outside of Russia. Study can be submitted for approval either by a sponsor, if they have a local representative in Russia, or by a CRO representing their interests based on power of attorney. The three main steps to start a clinical trial in Russia are the following. First, you obtain approval from the Ministry of Health. After that, you have to get local ethics committees approvals, and then apply for the import license for IMP and for export license for biosamples, should you choose to use a foreign central lab. The total timeline for clinical trial approval is about 4 months. And do not forget that all documents submitted to the Ministry of Health must be translated into Russian. So that's about all. And as a bonus to all listeners, we are happy to send the checklist of documents for CTA submission in Russia. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And of course, many thanks to the Asia Regulatory Professionals Association for giving us this opportunity to speak at the webinar. So thank you for your attention and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.